on the bill which was passed in England for regulating the slave trade by Helen Maria Williams. So in this poem today we are going to discuss first about the background of this poem. Helen Maria Williams wrote on the bill which was passed in England for regulating the slave trade 1788. In response to the Dolban Act 1788, the first British law that attempted to regulate conditions on slave ships, although the act reduced overcrowding, it did not abolish slavery. Williams believed that regulation alone was insufficient and that the slave trade should be completely abolished. Historical reasons of the writing of this poem: to expose the horrors of the slave trade. During the 18th century, many British people were unaware of the brutal conditions endured by enslaved Africans during the Middle Ages. Williams vividly describes scenes, disease, and the suffocation and death to reveal the reality of slavery. Number two, to create sympathy for the enslaved. Influenced by the culture of sensibility, Williams wanted readers to emotionally identify with enslaved Africans. By portraying the suffering of mothers, children, and families, she sought to awaken compassion and moral responsibility. To support the abolitionist movement, the poem was written when the British abolitionist campaign was gaining momentum. Williams celebrates the passing of the bill but uses it as an opportunity to demand complete abolition, not merely better conditions on slave ships. Number 4, to condemn greed and injustice. Williams attacks slave traders and wealthy merchants who prioritized profit over human life. She argues that economic gain can never justify human suffering. So Helen Maria Williams wrote the poem 1788. It responds to the Dolban Act, which regulated conditions on slave ships. She aimed to expose the cruelty of the slave trade, evoke sympathy for enslaved Africans, support the growing abolitionist movement, and urge British to move from regulation to the complete abolition of slavery. So now moving forward to the stanza number 1 and 2. The horror, this talking about the horror of the slave ship. Williams begins by describing the terrible conditions aboard slave ships. The cries, groans, and suffering of enslaved Africans fill the atmosphere. She depicts captives sent in darkness, far from their homeland, facing disease and suffocation and death. The poet especially emphasizes the emotional pain of being separated from Africa. Okay, so they now move to America. So the in the theme is in the stanza number 1 and 2, physical and the emotional suffering of the enslaved people. So the technique, he tried to showcases about the vivid imagery and the emotional language. Okay, just I am read out the whole summary. Then come to the stanza number 3 and 4. What it talk about? Suffering of women and children. The poet focuses on enslaved women and children. She presents a heartbreaking image of a desperate mother holding her dying child. Their suffering symbolizes the destruction of family bonds caused by slavery. Just as you imagine yourself. In the stanza number 3 and 4, the theme is the maternal grief and the human tragedy also. So Williams highlighted female suffering more than many abolitionist writers. Stanza number 5 and 6. Praise for Britain. Williams praises Britain for passing the law regulating slave ships. She sees this as a noble act of mercy and humanity. So Britain is portrayed as a leader among European nations in taking steps against cruelty, theme the humanitarian reform and moral leadership. Tone, celebratory and hopeful. Then stanza number 7 to 10, criticism of the wealthy and indifferent. The poet attacks those who oppose reforms because of economic interest. Wealthy merchants and slavery traders care only about profit and ignore human suffering. She mocks people who questions whether enslaved people deserve even basic comforts such as air and space. So the theme is greed versus compassion. Technique, rhetorical questions, and irony applied in the stanza number 7 to 8, 7 to 10. Now come to the 11 to 14. Slavery as a violation of nature. Williams argues that slavery corrupts God's creation for enslaved Africans. The world becomes a place of pain rather than beauty. So nature, which should bring joy and freedom, appears ruined by oppression. So the theme is slavery against natural and moral law. Technique contrast between beauty versus suffering. Okay, beauty and the suffering. Yeah. Then stanza number 15 to 18 call for complete abolition. The poet urges reformers not to stop with regulation. She condemns attempts to calculate how much suffering enslaved people can endure. Human pain should never be measured for profit. So the theme is total abolition rather than partial reform. That one is urgent and passionate. It's stanza number 19 to 22. The value of home and family. Williams reminds readers the happiness they enjoy with their families. She then contrasts this with the enslaved person's loss of home, culture, and loved ones. The captive is condemned to a life without hope. So the theme is exile, loss, and homesickness. Important idea: the loss of home is one of the slavery's greatest cruelties. Stanza number 23 to 26. Condemnation of slave traders. The poet portrays slave traders as people whose hearts have become frozen and insensitive. They ignore the cries of and suffering of their victims and treat human beings as commodities. So the theme is moral corruption caused by greed. Symbol of frozen esteem symbolizes the hurt and hurt. The stanza number 27 to 29, the noble sailor. Williams distinguishes ordinary British sailors from slave traders. She praises sailors who bravely serve their country and suggests that true British values are incompatible with slavery. So the theme is national horror and morality. Now come to the question number 30, stanza number 30 to 33, sale of human beings. The poet describes the arrival of enslaved Africans in the Americas, they, where they are sought like goods in a marketplace. Captives desperately search for signs of kindness from their new owners. So the theme is dehumanization and fear. And the key image is men, their merchandise. Stanza number 34 to 37. Appeal to greedy. Williams directly addresses those motivated by wealth. She reminds them that life is short and that money cannot bring lasting happiness. She urges that them to choose mercy before that comes. Theme: moral responsibility and the morality. And the technique: direct address. For them. Stanza number 38 to 41. Power of eloquence. The poet invokes the power of eloquence and public speech. She hopes that persuasive voices in Parliament will expose the horrors of slavery and inspire reform. So the theme is literature and rhetoric as instruments of social change. So the final stanza, vision of universal freedom. So the poem ends with the appeal of Britain to complete the work it has begun. William hopes that Britain will abolish slavery entirely and aspire other nations to do the same. Freedom is presented as a universal human right. The theme is freedom, justice, and hope. So it's the optimistic and inspirational for them. So now come to the critical analysis this part. So the poem is in the abolitionist protest poem. It combines sentimentalism with political activism. William uses the graphic imagery to create sympathy for enslaved Africans. Women and children occupy a central place, making the poem unique among anti-slavery writings. The poem moves from description of suffering, condemnation of great call for reform, vision of freedom. Though it praises the 1788 Act, it ultimately argues that regulation is insufficient, slavery must be abolished completely. On a bill which was passed in England for regulating the slave trade is a powerful humanitarian poem that exposes the cruelty of the slave trade through vivid imagery and emotional appeal. Helen Maria Williams condemns great slavery's compassion, and calls for the complete abolition of slavery. The poem transforms personal sympathy into political action, making it one of the important abolitionist poems of the late 18th century. So, the most important themes: number one, anti slavery and freedom. The poem strongly condemns slavery and presents freedom as a basic human right. Williams argues that no person should be treated as property or deprived of liberty. Human suffering. The poet vividly describes the physical and emotional suffering of enslaved Africans, including disease, suffocation, separation from family, and their despair. This theme forms the emotional core of the poem. Mercy versus greed. Williams con- contrasts the compassion of abolitionists with the greed of slave traders. She condemns those who value profit over human life and calls for humanity and justice. Impactful analysis of the literary devices, imagery, making suffering visible. Williams uses powerful visual and the sensory imagery to force readers to witness the horrors of slavery, images of saints and suffocation and the disease and the dying and the murders and overcrowded. She transforms an abstract political issue into a human tragedy. The reader does not merely learn about the slavery, but emotionally experience its cruelty. The rats in newborn in hopeless chains. So the critical insight, the vivid imagery serves as a political weapon, creating sympathy for enslaved Africans and strengthening the abolitionist case. Apostrophe, the arrogant moral appeal. The poet directly addressed to the Britain, turning poem into the public space rather than a private reflection. Britain, the novel blessed decree. By addressing Britain as if it were a person, Williams makes the nation morally accountable for its actions. Critical insight. Apostrophe transformed the poem into a call for national conscience and social reform. Personification. Moral forces becomes living powers. Williams personifies abstract concepts such as the mercy, despair, and avarice and greed. So these forces seems to act like human beings influencing society. Mercy calls the despair, critical insight. Personification elevates the poem from a political argument to a moral battle between good and evil. The struggle against slavery becomes a struggle between mercy and greed. Metaphor: slavery as a fictional force. Williams repeatedly uses metaphors to present slavery as a disease that corrupts humanity. Slavery's scope: the metaphor suggests that slavery is a better position that spreads suffering to both victims and oppressors. Critical insight: the metaphor shows that slavery damages not only enslaves but also moral character of society itself. A rhetorical question challenging the reader. William asks the questions require no answers because the moral truth is obvious. Why poor young hopeless captive pen? These questions expose the selfishness and hypocrisy of those who defend slavery. So the rhetorical questions force two readers to examine their own conscience and reject indifference. Contrast: exposing moral contradictions. Mercy versus greed, freedom versus slavery, civilization versus barbarity, home versus exile, humanity versus cruelty. So the critical conclusion to hold this point. The literary devices on the bill, which was passed in England for regulating the slave trade, are not merely decorative, they function as an instruments of moral persuasion. Through vivid imagery and emotional apostrophe, symbolic personification, powerful metaphors, rhetorical questioning, and striking contrast, Helen Maria Williams transforms the poem into a passionate evolutionist manifesto. The poem seeks not only to move the reader emotionally, but also to inspire political and humanitarian action against slavery. So that's it. If you like this video, you can like it, and if you don't like, you can dislike it. Bye bye.